So we've got 20 eggs in the incubator, and 4 of those eggs are from a copper moran. They're this really dark coppery color eggs. They're really cool. And then I've got 8 Easter egger eggs from home. They're blues and kind of cream and olive colors. And then I've got 8 eggs from outside. 5 of those were the olive color eggs, and then 3 of them were smaller brown eggs. And they range inside from anywhere from a size from about 47 grams, I think, to up to about 71 grams. So there's a big discrepancy in size and shape and different types of eggs. The eggs that we got from outside, those hens have only been laying for a couple weeks. And the other eggs, all of those hens have been laying for months and months, in some cases over a year. So one thing that you are going to do today, and hopefully within the class you and a partner can work on this, and you can just kind of be tossing this around in your brain, is I want you to come up with an observational experiment. So something that you can observe and think about, something that and make a prediction of what you think will happen with our eggs that are laid. So we're going to incubate. It'll probably take about 21 days, usually 20 to 23 sometimes. And when those eggs start hatching out, what are some things that we could look at and see just by what we know about the eggs that we put in there? And I'll take you back there. I'll bring them out here so you can see the eggs just to kind of get a little better idea. But what are some things that maybe we can predict will happen based on either the egg size or how long those hens have been laying, or where they may come from? The color of the egg have anything to do with anything? Color, is reflective most of the time of the breed of bird. And so all those things I want you to think about, consider, and then make a hypothesis of what you think the outcome will be based on the question that you come up with. Okay? So like, will purple eggs make purple chickens? Now, that's kind of a simplified version. We don't have purple eggs, don't worry. But that's the kind of thing I want you to think about. What's a scientific question you have about those eggs that we can observationally look for as we hatch these out? Now, I say observational because we're not supposed to do any experimenting on vertebrates. There's some law in place, and you got to have special permission to do experimentation, like they do rats and mice and rabbits and monkeys and all kind of stuff. You've got to have special permission procedure. You got to have a special facility, all this other stuff, in order to do experimentation on animals like that. And we do not have that, nor do I want to get into that. So we're just purely making observations on what's going on in terms of what happens as these eggs incubate and then hatch out. Hopefully by day 7 or 8, we'll be able to tell if they're viable or not. I'm a little bit concerned about the eggs that came from my house, the Easter egger eggs, because my rooster got in a fight with another rooster probably, 4 or 5 months ago. This other big rooster we had got in there on accident, and they went around, and the rooster I have now got his neck cut all up, and one of his legs was messed up. He was limping around for like a month or 2. And so I hope he got all his mojo back. He's still going through the act of relations with the other hens in the pen, but I'm still a little concerned about his reproductive abilities. So I guess we'll see. My brother had a rooster that had kind of the same thing. A dog got in and they got in a fight, and he was unable to reproduce after that, even though he was still trying very diligently. So is that button still beeping back there?
Yes.
When you're thinking about what you need to know in the ecology unit, you're going to think, well, this sounds a lot like what we studied in 9th grade biology. And for the most part, it is. But you need to think of this in the context of, number 1, energy. How is energy transferred between different organisms? Number 2, what are the relationships? What relationships do organisms have with each other? Okay? And then number 3, you need to think about it in terms of, so we went over genetics. Now we're going over ecology. And then when we get to evolution, which is going to be our last unit, some of y'all out there may be doing something different. When we get to evolution is just looking at how organisms interact in their environment and how does that environment affect their genetics, okay? Now, you'll notice on the AP Classroom, they have ecology last. I don't like to do it like that. I like to talk about ecology, environments, and then look at evolution in the context of how does the environment affect the genetics of an organism. There's a lot of math that goes into it, but it's important to understand those relationships first, I think. So, College Board didn't think so, but we'll see how it works out for you guys. Y'all are my own little experimental group in here, I guess. So, sorry about that. So on 1158 in your book, we start ecology. Man, that lady on 1157, she looks fierce. It's like one of those smiles I give when I'm fixing to destroy my kid for doing something bad. Anyway,
Mr. Mac,
yeah.
have you seen 51st Dates?
Yes.
She looks like that lady.
Oh, yeah, from 51st Day, okay. We celebrate everyone here. Number one, regulation. When you see the term regulation, that means to control. Number two, these are important concepts reviews. Transpiration. We discussed transpiration quite a bit during the photosynthesis unit, correct? Yes? No? Everybody's familiar with transpiration? So, transpiration is the movement of water out of the plant leaves. Okay, sometimes it's referred to as evapotranspiration. The more water loss isn't that bad if you've got a lot of water around or a lot of water in the soil, like plants don't really care. Water loss is a big deal when there's not a lot of water available in the environment. And so we'll talk about that. Actually, one of your big labs for this unit, and maybe the only big lab, is on transpiration. It's a week-long lab where we basically have some plants and we measure how much transpiration is taking place. And then what that means in terms of how the plants are growing and developing. So, and we'll put some different factors in play that affect transpiration. So, it'll be something we look at. And then number three, hydrogen bonds. Water, because the four possible hydrogen bonds can absorb huge amounts of sunlight energy. So, water is very important to life on Earth. Water occupies most of the Earth, most of the globe, like 71%, something like that, surface of the Earth. And it's super important because it helps us to maintain a stable temperature on Earth. It also helps our bodies to maintain a stable temperature. It absorbs water, and then absorbs heat, and then also gives off heat. And kind of the same thing. When it's sunny out, bodies of water absorb heat, and then at nighttime, those bodies of water give off heat. And so in that way, it helps to regulate those temperatures. Okay? Ecology. Ecology, you break that down into two different parts. Ology means study of. Eco, or that comes from the Greek word oikos. Think of ecos, and then that comes from oikos, O-I-K-O-S, I think is the Greek. But anybody know what that means? About well versed in the Greek? Yeah, it means house or home. So when you think of ecology, it literally means like study of the home. And so think, well, this is not my home, but in actuality, you're studying where organisms live. You're studying their home, how their interactions are. So that's where it's going, okay? And I'm going to kind of fly through some of this old stuff here that we've got. These are some basic notes from, really, I mean, most of this you've seen probably in ninth grade, but I want to make sure. If you have any questions or something's coming up, let me know. God bless America. Will you go back there and unplug that? Is it still beeping? I'll sort it out later. Just unplug it. It's in the back there. Just unplug it from the wall. And then I'll sort out the incubator's malfunctioning. The wall. Good job. Thank you. Okay. So, abiotic. When you put a or an in front of a word, what does that do to it? A or an in front of a word usually means no or none. So biotic factors are living factors like organisms, bacteria, protists, fungi, plants, things that are factors of those living organisms and how they interact. It could be dead organisms like a dead piece of wood or piece of wood rotting. That would all fall under the biotic factors that affect how ecosystems work. Abiotic means not living, but things that affect the environment and how things work in the environment. So these are things like temperature, water, humidity, nutrients, soil, wind, Soil, I guess we would say the non-living soil's I don't really like that term. Let's say like the non-living parts of the soil or rock. Okay, a lot of it is non-living. So, but there's also a lot of living components in the soil as well. All right, and then I'm not going to talk about we'll get into the evolutionary part later. So we'll skip over that. The next term in part 2 there is biogeography. Biogeography. What does that mean, Ashlyn?
The distribution of species and distribution of patterns seen from an area as well as a species.
Okay, so geography means location. Biogeography means where living things are located and how they're distributed. All right, one term that we discuss and you hear a lot in ecology is biodiversity. Now, I want you guys to pull out your environmental science book under your desk. Now, I know we're not in environmental science, but that's okay. And so the first term that's listed there is, what does that say? Species richness. Species richness is often associated with biodiversity, number of different species in a given area. But if you think about overall biodiversity, you can't just count the number of different species. That's not really telling you like the whole story. And there's actually some mathematical calculations that we're going to look at in here. Hold on a second. Species, turn to 122. There we go. So 122 in your environmental book. Don't worry, I'll show you guys at home. We have 2 different diagrams, 2 communities at the bottom. Okay? Community 1 and Community 2. Community 1 and Community 2. I want y'all guys to look at these really quickly. Which one of these, Matthew, is the most has the most species richness? The most different numbers of species?
The first one.
Community 1. Okay, do y'all see that? Hold on a second. Which one's has the most species richness, Miranda? Ashlyn, which one's the most species diversity?
The second one.
Walker?
It's community 1.
Katie?
They both have the same amount of species.
There are 4 different species. Are you people high in here? A, B, C, and D. They even list them down here. A, B, C, and D. There is the same number of species in each one of these communities. You should know this because you took apes. God bless America. Now, just knowing the number of different species doesn't tell us everything we need to know about this community because obviously they don't look very similar, do they? Okay, which community has greater species evenness, meaning an even distribution of species? 1, yes, I can agree with that. So 1 has an even distribution of species. Sarah, which one of these communities think would be more likely to lose its biodiversity that it has or species diversity? Why? Yeah, if lightning struck a couple of these jokers right here or a couple of these, then you wouldn't have any of that species left, right? Or a wildfire came through and took out a few of these, there wouldn't be much left. So the more you have of each one, that's a good factor in biodiversity because it allows you, if some die, then you still have some left over, okay? So another important component of biodiversity is species evenness. Richness, the number of different species, but also evenness, how many of each one there are, okay? Because if you've got a bunch of different species, but a lot of those are just 1 or 2 of them, then that's not really telling you the whole story. So you guys have to, there's some kind of index that we're going to go through and do some calculations with later on, talking about biodiversity. But we got some bigger problems right now, sounds like. All right, normal species means one that, or you could say, I don't like normal there, I would say native, means they're indigenous or normally found in that area. And then non-native, okay, so there's some different words for this. Your note writer calls this transplant. I'm going to say non-native, alien, invasive. Is there another one? I can't think of it. Whatever, that'll be good enough. These are all things that should not be found in that location. They're not normally found there. Somebody's brought them in and planted them usually, okay? Or they caught a route on a boat somewhere they weren't supposed to and they came in. So which one of those is worse? Non-native, alien, or invasive? Invasive indicates that they have come in and they've started to take over in that area, like fire ants in the southeastern United States, kudzu in the southeastern United States. These are things that we would consider invasives because they are displacing and killing out other species. Did you guys know that fire ants were not in, we did not have fire ants here until like the 1920s or 30s? And they came from South America on a boat. I think they were probably bringing in plants or something on a ship, and probably there was a bed of fire ants or a queen, and they came in Mobile Bay and they spread out. My dad remembers, he grew up in North Alabama, that in North Alabama in the 50s when he was farming, he's like, we didn't have fire ants. And so it's a very different story now. Fire ants have spread all throughout the southeast, making their way farther and farther northward. You guys watch out. Abiotic or non-living factors. Temperature is one of the main ones. Sorry for the interruption. It's the office. Anyway, where were we? Abiotic. So temperature. How does temperature affect organisms? Too high or too low, what happens? What is affected specifically within the organism that could be harmful to it? What? Go. What did you say the first thing? You say denature? Okay, good. So when you're talking about enzymes or proteins that are functioning inside the body, especially enzymes that control rates of reaction, when the temperature gets too high, then those things could denature and stop functioning. If it gets too low, they could just the temperature gets low, they could get cold and then not be able to function properly. So good job. Water availability. Organisms need water, and if you don't have enough water, then you die. This pretty much is true with every organism, right? We need water in order to function. Water does two important things. What are they? It's not really nourishment that much. It's more for transport of waste and nutrients. So we need adequate amounts of water for that. And we also need water. Another important thing is for temperature regulation. So 60-70% of our body is probably closer to 70, is made up of water. And once you get dehydrated, you lose that ability to transport nutrients and materials like you should be able to. And also if it's like cold or hot, then it also affects your ability to regulate body temperature. Transpiration, I don't know if y'all remember that term, transpiration pull, where plants, that's where transpiration essentially pulls the water up out of the ground and up through the plant in combination with capillary action and the roots having different osmolarities in the different cells. So that should be a review from photosynthesis. Sunlight amount is going to affect the rate of photosynthesis somewhat. Wind is going to affect evaporation. It's also going to affect heat, your ability to regulate temperature. Sometimes wind's a good thing. Sometimes wind's a bad thing. It may be cold wind that just sucks the heat right out of you. It may be windy on a hot day, and it may be helpful for evaporation and help you to cool down. And then rocks and inorganic soil materials. Those things are going to affect abiotic factors are going to affect what can grow in an area. Okay? So these are all non-living components that affect the living components. Now, what is the distinction between climate and weather?
Weather is kind of like on a day-to-day basis, and climate is just how it is.
Yes. So weather is day-to-day. You can look on your phone and look up the weather app, and you can see what the weather is outside today. The average, the high temperature. And then climate would be the average temperature over time. So we have data probably going back 120 years or so. And so we can see what the average should be on today. But, the weather is probably going to be a little bit different because it's not always on the exact average. All right, turn to page 1060 real quick. So on 1060, that talks about biomes and climate conditions and things that affect climate conditions. So, biomes. Let's make a distinction between biomes and ecosystems. Who knows what that distinction is? Yeah.
Biomes are kind of like the larger aspect, and the ecosystems are the smaller aspect inside biomes.
Yeah, so biomes, you could have, like we have a desert biome, or 3 or 4 different types of deserts in the southwest of the United States. There's the Sahara Desert, the Namibian Desert, the Gobi Desert. So there are deserts all over the world. They all fit within a desert biome. meaning they have similar characteristics that they have in common. But the Sahara Desert and the Sonoran Desert and the Desert Southwest are drastically different from one another. If you look at the species and different organisms living there, how much rainfall they get on average. So they're not all created equally. They're all a little bit different, a little bit nuanced, but they all do have a few similar characteristics. And so we're going to be making, or you guys are going to be making an ecosystem brochure because, and some of y'all on APES last year already did this. I'm going to let y'all pick another one, but you guys are going to look at those specific details in those particular ecosystems. Okay. Now, one thing you need to know from 1060, there's this phenomenon called Hadley cells. Now, what do you need to know about Hadley cells? It's up here in this corner right here. Hadley cells basically describe why there's a lot of rainfall where? Who gets a lot of rainfall? What part of the earth? Did I say 1060?
Yes.
Sorry, 1160. That would help us out. Yeah, so we get a lot of rainfall at the equator, the tropics. What was on 1060?
Two-headed turtle.
A two-headed turtle? That was interesting too. So anyway, Hadley cells. So basically what happens at the equator, that's where you get the most sunlight. It gets hot there. Hot air does what? Rises. So the hot air rises, it goes up, that hot and moist air rises. As it goes up, the air is going to do what?
Descends.
As it gets farther and farther up, it's going to get cooler. Good. Cooler air that has moisture in it. What does that moisture in the air do? Condenses and rains, and then most of the rain comes back down. But you continually have this kind of heating and air getting pushed up. So moisture, a lot of that moisture comes out and stays there close to the equator, but that hot, drier air, after the moisture's kind of left, keeps rising and it gets pushed out toward away from the equator. And that's why at about 20 to 30 degrees north and south, what do we usually find? Deserts, good. And so it's because there's not much moisture getting pushed out of that Hadley cell. Most of the moisture kind of rains back down around the equator, and then it's much drier as that drier air gets pushed away from the equator. Good. And so that accounts for why most of our deserts are in those locations around the world. Now, our scenario is a little bit different in the southeast United States because we get a lot of rainfall. Probably we may have made 60-something inches this past year. Normally about 55 inches of rain, which is pretty good. Seeing as we're at about the same latitude as Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California, all those in West Texas, all those places are desert. Okay? Why are we not desert if we're at the same latitude? Where does our moisture come from? Yeah, so we are fortunate in our position and where the Gulf of Mexico is and how moisture gets pulled up out of the Gulf to where we are. We get lots of rainfall. We also get lots of tornadoes because a lot of that warm moist air comes out of the Gulf, and then you have cooler, dry air coming from like up the northwest, And when they meet, cold air and hot air meeting, that's usually where you have your fronts and your storms and the problems that result, like tornadoes or bad thunderstorms. All right, let's move on here. Tropics. The tropics are found at what latitude? Latitude is what? Latitude is how far north or south of the lines going north or south of the equator, okay? So the tropics are found at 23 degrees north to 23 degrees south. What other significant, what else is there of significance of the 23.5 degrees where you find the tropics? 23.5 degrees is also the tilt of the what?
Axis.
The axis of the earth. Good. And the tilt of the earth causes our seasons. Good. All right. So both those are 23.5. Once you get up to about 66 degrees, you're up at the Arctic Circle. And so that's your polar zones above there, very cold. And then the area between we call the temperate zones because it's like a temperate or moderate type climate. Okay? What are some other factors that affect the geography and also the climate and living organisms. Turn over to the next page, 1163. Oceans. Oceans are very important. We said they help to absorb lots of heat, and at night they give off heat. Now, if you are not close to a body of water and there's not much moisture in the air, the difference between the daytime and nighttime temperature are significant. Like if you go out in the desert, there's not much moisture in the air, you're not close to the ocean, you could have a 50, 60 degrees temperature swing between day and nighttime. There's nothing holding that heat in at night. But if you live where we do, where there's, we're not too far from the ocean, we're also have a lot of moisture in the air. In the day it might be 95 in the summer, and at night it might be 75. It's not going to go below that much. It's because that moisture in the air, that humidity is helping to hold on to that, a lot of that heat. Okay? Really the only time we see a huge temperature swing is when you have very cool, dry air in the wintertime. And so a lot of times when you have very cool, dry nights, then the temperature can drop. You may have a bigger swing. But that's because there's not much moisture in the air. Mountains. Mountains can affect the amount of rainfall. Now, on page 1163, you have this phenomenon known as rain shadow effect. Now, the rain shadow effect happens a lot in mountains we have out west. And then I've also seen this in the Andes in South America. When we were in Australia, saw the same thing happen in where were we? We weren't in the Northwest Territories. We were in, what's the name of that? Queensland. All right. So anyway, so what you have here is moist warm air coming off the ocean or a body of water. And as it comes inland, once it goes up a large hillside or mountain range, that moist air, as it goes up, it's going to do what? Just keep in mind, it's continually getting pushed in. It's going to what?
That's what's going to cause rainfall.
It's going to get colder. So when it gets colder, that water is going to condense. It's going to rain. Most of the moisture is going to stay on one side of the mountain. Okay? And on the other side of the mountain, that air is still, even though it's rained out, that air is still, currents are still moving in this direction. It's going to still keep moving over to the other side. It's just not going to have much moisture in it. And so the other side of the mountain is going to be
Cold.
Dry.
Well, I don't know about cold, but it's going to be dry. I mean, the mountains are typically cold, but it's going to be much drier. So that's most mountain ranges, when you're out west, if you'll pay attention, if you're going over a mountain range from one side to the other, you probably will tell there's some difference in moisture, the amount of greenery. You may also see a difference in the amount of snowfall in different locations, depending on what time of year you go there. So those are things to keep in mind. And this is shaped so much about how civilizations were developed and made based on which side of the mountain they're on. So it's not always equal, the real estate on each side. Let's see, ponds and lakes, 1172. Let's finish up here. Okay. On 1172, we need to talk about stratification. Stratification is, what does strata mean? All right, strata means layers. Okay, so now let's think like we were in a pond or lake up north somewhere, like in Minnesota. Shout out to all my Minnesota people there, the three of you. In the wintertime in Minnesota, the lakes, you would expect them to be, or ponds, frozen, cold as a tater. It was like negative 30 the other day I saw somewhere in North Minnesota, maybe like, what is that place? I've been to it before. Grand Falls. Anyway, I can't remember. Anyway, freezes over. Why is the temperature warmer underwater than it is above the water? The ice creates a layer on top. It's floating on top, and it's basically acting like, yeah, it's acting like insulation, trapping some of that heat under the water, and which is very beneficial if you are an aquatic organism in that water, so that you don't freeze to death. Good. So the fact that water freezes, ice is less dense and floats on top, it is helping those organisms to survive. Can you imagine if ice was more dense, like most solids, as it got colder, and it just sunk to the bottom, and then more ice formed? The whole lake would freeze over, right? So you would never have that stratification that occurs and then that warmer, a little bit slighter warmer water underneath. Thank you, water, for your unique chemical properties. In the spring, snow thaws, ice melts. The ice that was on top of the lake, it melts. What's it going to do when it melts? It's cold, so it's going to sink. And when it sinks, it's going to sink. Warmer water is going to come up. And what two things are going to get mixed up in that springtime turnover? What two things in the water? Nutrients and water's turning, it's mixing. Oxygen, good. So, springtime, very productive. You got a mixture of oxygen and nutrients, which is what things in the water like. Now, summertime. You jump in a lake in the summertime, even in the south, what happens? You go down 10 feet, your feet get cold because you have these layers. It's warm on top. There's not a lot of moisture and rain coming in. It doesn't rain that too much in the summer. And then you have these different layers of, it gets progressively cooler as you go down. If you like, does anybody like to fish? Obviously, no one in here. If you were a fish in the summertime, where would you want to hang out? You don't want to hang out on the top, Matthew? Why? Why would you not want to hang out on the top? You don't really care. The temperature's not a factor other than the higher the temperature, the less oxygen's available. That's right, Katie. So if you're a fish and there's not much oxygen in the water already, you want to hang out where you get as much as you can. So yeah, y'all need to stick to those deeper parts, you people out there fishing. And then in autumn, that warm water on top starts to cool, which causes it to from the top, makes it drop, goes all the way down. Why?
Because of cold water.
It's getting colder, yeah. So colder water sinks. And so you wind up with this fall time turnover as this cooler water is dropping from the top, it's dropping down, and that water is turning over. And then you have a mixture of what again?
Nutrients and oxygen.
Nutrients and oxygen. Beautiful. I like your enthusiasm today. So for those of you in my actual class at school, we have an eco brochure that we're going to do, a little trifold brochure. And that assignment is on day 22 of Schoology. So we're going to talk about that in here. You guys can look at that and post that for next week. Take care.